My dad used to take us sailing. We would go sailing all over the place from Long Island to Block Island to Fisher's Island to Cuttyhunk to wherever. And I remember one time we got caught in the middle of a storm, and there were really big waves, and we were just in a little boat with a cabin, and it was the waves seemed like they were 10 feet high. I don't know how high they were, but it was rough, and the boat was rocking, and water was coming in. My mom had managed to make a bowl of clam chowder, put it on a seat, and he sat right in it. And, he cursed a blue streak. It was a rough ride, and finally we got into port, and everything was safe, and I remember my sister said, "Daddy, can we cry now?" There were a couple things that I left out of my speech that I wanted to include, but I didn't have time. It would have just been ridiculously long to include them, so I didn't. But, one of the things I was going to talk about was his relationship to his father, which was a little bit contentious. His father was an American firster, which means that he was part of the movement of people who did not want to get involved in World War II and who thought that the United States was stronger not getting involved in European entanglements and foreign wars. He influenced my dad. My dad was not an American firster. He went to war. He believed in intervention. He was an anti-communist, but still, my dad gave me Washington's farewell address, which is sort of the Bible of the American firsters, because Washington said in his farewell address, "Do not get involved in foreign wars. Stay out of European wars." And this totally influenced my dad to a huge degree. And I think that, part of his public policy view, he never ever, that I heard, even though he was a staunch anti-communist, he never cheered any American military intervention, ever. I mean, he thought that these things were maybe necessary evils, things that had to be done, but he was always really very conscious of the cost, the human cost, to the soldiers and to the populations, and he didn't want to go that way. He wanted to find a better way to win that conflict through ideas, through economic prosperity, and through things like that. So I think that American firster tendency still influenced him, even though, he went the other way. But I remember he mentioned going on a long trip with his father. It was either before or after the war. They drove across the country, and over the course of that trip, I think his father explained a lot of his ideas to him. But, part of that had to do with the imparting an idea about the Foundation's mission, that it should have something to do with maintaining a free society, maintaining a society where people had the kind of opportunity to amass the kind of wealth or do whatever they wanted to do with their lives the way my grandfather had been able to do. So that was a big mission. But the other thing I kind of want to talk about was maybe a little bit more personal. My dad loved sailing, and sailing meant a huge amount to him. I think that he spent all this time in political activity, having to do with freedom, but I think sailing was the place where he felt free. That's where he really experienced freedom personally and tangibly. He was an expert boat builder and sailor. He designed, he didn't design boats, but he built boats off of designs. He used to draft my sister and myself into these wooden, boat building extravaganzas, and it would go like this. He would start reading a boat building magazine. He would fall in love with the plan. He would go through several different plans. He'd fall in love with a plan and say, "Oh, this design's beautiful. This is wonderful." And he would start sketching it out on a board. He would start taking the plans and putting them up in his shop. And before you knew it, he would be actually building a wooden boat. And for the next 9 months or a year, he would be slowly building this boat, and he would be drafting Heather and myself, and mostly me. Finally, we launched the boat to great fanfare, and hopefully it would float. Usually it floated. His first boat that he built did not float, but then it absorbed the water, and the spaces filled up between the planks, and then it floated after it got wet. But his subsequent boats all floated, and he loved them for like about 2 months. They were great for about 2 months, and then he'd get dissatisfied with the boat, give it away to somebody, like the Boy Scouts or some friend, or say, "Here, you can have my boat," and he'd swear off boat building. And I said, "I'm never going to build another boat. I've had it. This is ridiculous. It's just so much effort, and it just sucks." And then 6 months later, he'd be going through the magazines again, and the process would start all over. And he made it, he built about, 8 or 9 boats in his life doing that. I went through a really rough period with my dad for about 10 years between 1993 to 2000. That's 7 years. But in 2000, it was the absolute worst of it. And I made some decisions and, did what I could to avoid conflict. And instead, I just spent time, trying to work on my personal relationship with him. And I spent some time building boats with him again. I hadn't built boats with him for a few years, and I started building boats with him again and sailing some of his wooden boats. Gradually, over the next 3 years, our relationship improved by my doing this and my spending time with him. And eventually, our relationship improved to the point where, a few things happened which probably don't bear going into on tape. But he had a few realizations, and then one day he came to me and he said, "Rod, I have to apologize to you. I had it wrong. I was wrong about you." And that was a big moment for me. And boat building was key to that. Sailing boats was key to that. And it was key to a lot of other things. For understanding Dad, understanding his love of sailing was key because, it was key personally for us, but it was also, this is maybe a little abstract, but Dad is known as one of the people who was one of the early key supporters for supply-side economics, providing funding for the thinkers and stuff like that. Well, supply-side economics has something called the Laffer curve, which is a key concept about income taxes. And I don't want to get into it here, but, I think that Randy supported supply-side economics because he understood it from a sailor's perspective. He had this intuitive grasp of the wind and the waves and the force on the sails. And he sometimes would talk about economics to me, and he would talk about lift and drag, how taxes were like a drag on the economy, or cutting taxes was added lift or removed drag. So he had these nautical terms that come from aerodynamics and hydrodynamics, right? And I think that he actually, his whole grasp of this subject that he was funding came from sailing. That he saw the flows of money as being the same as the flows of wind or the flows of water, right? And that, instead of going over a sail or over a hull, they were sort of like, the thing that was baffling these things was the tax rates. So he saw, if you really want to have an economy that moves, you have to have that curve of the taxes be nice, tight curve like a well-trimmed sail. So I think that his view of economics totally came from his sailing, which is, it's kind of an abstruse point, but that probably nobody knows, and it probably doesn't make any difference at all, but I think it was there.